afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the channel for 2021. Waiting for a quorum. I think we're waiting for 2 more people.
Yeah, actually, I think now just one, and Member Bush just emailed me, so he should be joining soon. Madam Chair, we now have a quorum.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the June 4th, 2021 meeting of the San Diego County Air Pollution Control District Governing Board. Chair Vargas is unable to attend today, so I will be stepping in to chair the meeting. Before we begin, I would like to inform the public that simultaneous Spanish language interpretation is available. I now ask the interpreter, please go over the accessibility features in Spanish at this time. And I do see there's an extra button at the bottom that's available that says interpretation. So may the interpreter now go over the accessibility features. Is that Maricela? Madam Clerk, do we have the interpreter present?
Yes, she is speaking now to the public.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair, you may proceed.
Thank you. I will now call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Before I call the roll, I would like to ask those members of the public wishing to address the board under non-agenda public communication to please dial into the conference line at this time using the instructions provided to you. In addition to Chair Vargas, members Birkbeck, Garcia, and Member Martinez have informed the clerk that they will be absent from today's meeting. All board members are participating via teleconference. As such, all votes will be taken by roll call vote. With that, Member Bush.
Here.
Member Elo Rivera.
Present.
Member Fletcher.
Here.
Member Gomez.
Here.
Member Medina.
Present.
Member Shu.
Here.
Member Whitburn.
Here.
Vice Chair Sanchez.
Sanchez present.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to remind board members to please turn your cameras on and keep them on, and everyone to mute your microphone if you're not speaking. If you'd like to comment, please raise your hand and I will then recognize you. We will now move on to public communications. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to the board on any subject matter within the board's jurisdiction, but not an item on today's agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any members of the public that wish to address the board at this time?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. There are no members of the public wishing to address the board under public communication today.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We're now on item number C, which is approval of the minutes. We will now move to the approval of the May 21st, 2021 San Diego Air Pollution Control District Governing Board minutes, which we also call statement of proceedings. Is there a motion for approval?
Motion to approve.
Okay, is there a second? A motion by Member Gomez, seconded by Member Bush. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Thank you. Member Bush.
Here.
Member Elo Rivera.
Yes.
Member Fletcher.
Fletcher, aye.
Member Gomez.
Yes.
Member Medina,
Aye.
Member Shu,
Aye.
Member Whitburn,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sanchez.
Sanchez, aye.
Thank you. That motion passes with all board members who are present voting aye.
Thank you. We're now on item number D. We will now have the interim APCO report by Mr. Robert Ryder. Mr. Ryder, please feel free to begin.
Thank you, Vice Chair Sanchez, and good afternoon, board members. I have a short but important update for you. On Wednesday of this week, the EPA issued a ruling to reclassify the San Diego region from a serious to a severe ozone non-attainment area. This was expected as described in the APCD's ozone attainment plan that was approved last year by both the APCD board and the California Air Resources Board. While ozone pollution levels have dropped over time, the region has yet to meet the ozone standards, and the longer it takes to meet them, the more critical the non-attainment classification becomes in accordance with federal law. As a result of the new severe classification, the APCD is required to adopt new and amended rules to further control and reduce ozone pollution from stationary sources and other sources under its jurisdiction. So those proposed rulemakings will be presented to the board this summer for consideration of adoption. And that concludes my report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. Are there any questions from the board members? I am seeing no hands up, so we will now move to our agenda item, and it is item number 1. It is our only item for discussion, which is a public hearing on the interim air pollution control officer's proposed budget for the San Diego County Air Pollution Control District for fiscal year 2021 to 2022. The budget adoption process is specified in state law and requires the board to hold 2 public hearings that are separated by at least 2 weeks. Today's hearing is the first hearing held for purposes of receiving the proposed budget, providing the public with the opportunity to comment, as well as hearing comments from members of the board. The second public hearing is scheduled for June 18th, 2021 for the purpose of budget adoption. The public may testify during either one of these 2 hearings, either one or both. They can also submit comments online at the APCD website or by email to APCD public comment at sdcounty.ca.gov. APCD staff members have prepared a presentation for this time. Madam Clerk, can you please provide the public testimony instructions to those members that wish to speak on this item? They will be heard after the staff presentation.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I would ask any members of the public that wish to address the board on this item to please dial into the conference line now using the instructions that have been provided to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's begin with the staff presentation.
Thanks again, Vice Chair and board members. We're pleased to present you and the public with the district's proposed budget for next fiscal year, which runs from July 1, 2021 through June 30, 2022. The proposed budget is balanced and fully funds APCD's existing and required programs to advance the mission of improving air quality to protect public health and the environment, with $84.3 million in expenditures and revenues and 164 existing staff positions. As the Vice Chair noted, budget adoption is an open process established in state law and requires the district to hold 2 public hearings. Today's hearing is the first, held for the exclusive purpose of reviewing the proposed budget and providing the public with the opportunity to comment on it. Budget adoption will be considered at the second public hearing held during the board's next regularly scheduled meeting in 2 weeks. However, staff propose a 2-phased process to budget development in this first year under the new governing board, which was fully seated only 2 months ago. The board's new governance committee will meet in the weeks and months ahead to identify the agency's key priorities for fiscal year 21-22 and beyond. And program revenues are projected to increase following the board's planned consideration this October of increases to permit fees and other fees for district services, as you ruled at the last meeting. So accordingly, staff are proposing to return to the board this fall with proposed budget adjustments to align with the board's identified priorities and to reflect any revenue adjustments and further public input. So with that, I'll now turn the floor over to John Jayasinghe. John's the district's Chief of Support Services, who will provide an overview of the proposed budget. John, please take it away. And you might be on mute if you're trying to speak, John.
Okay, can everybody hear me and see the screen here?
We
Yes.
can.
Thank you.
Success.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Sanchez and board members. The San Diego County Air Pollution Control District is conducting public hearings on the Air Pollution Control Officer's recommended budget for fiscal year 21-22. The proposed budget document details the spending plan for the district under the control of the governing board. 2 hearings are scheduled as follows. Today's hearing is scheduled for public testimony on the recommended budget, and Friday, June 18th, 2021 at 1:30 p.m. is scheduled for public testimony on the recommended budget and governing board action. In this presentation, I will provide an overview of the budget timeline and cycle, budget highlights, accomplishments and goals, and a requested action. The proposed budget is strategically aligned with the district's vision and mission. The vision is clean air for all. The mission is to improve air quality, to protect public health and the environment. The San Diego County Air Pollution Control District protects the public and the environment from harmful effects of air pollution by reducing toxic air contaminants and by attaining and maintaining the health-based clean air standards throughout the San Diego region. The district's proposed budget was posted on the district's website on May 5th, 2021. Notice of its availability was emailed to approximately 15,000 permit holders and stakeholders via the district's GovDelivery email subscription service. Additional stakeholders and members of the public were notified in English and Spanish via the district's social media accounts, Facebook and Twitter. The district has invited stakeholders to submit written comments online or by email and testify at these hearings. In this inaugural year of the newly reformed agency under a new governing board, staff are following this budget and fee adoption timeline that was approved by the board at the last meeting. In August, the district will post the new proposed fees and conduct a public workshop. In September, fees hearing number 1 is scheduled. In October, fees hearing number 2 is scheduled. In the fall, staff propose returning to the board with proposed budget adjustments to align with the board priorities and to reflect revenue adjustments resulting from any board adopted amendments to the fees. Any revised fees would be effective December. This is the general reoccurring budget cycle for the district going forward. The cycle begins in July with the new fiscal year, and staff begins working on closing the books for the prior fiscal year and reporting the financial status for the district. In November, February, and May, quarterly financial budget reviews will be conducted. In December, the budget development process begins. The recommended budget is prepared by April for public and board review. In June, the budget is adopted and fiscal year end is closed. The budget cycle is a continuous process, including extensive monitoring and review throughout the year. In this section, I will be highlighting some of the key funded elements within the proposed budget and some of the fiscal challenges and uncertainties. Let's take a closer look into the numbers. First, we will go over revenue and expenditure by classification. The revenue and expenditure classifications are described in detail in the budget that is posted on the district's website. The district's total revenues for next fiscal year are estimated to be $84 million. The district's primary sources of revenue are intergovernmental revenues provided through federal and state budget processes, and license permits and franchises, which are primarily permit application and permit renewal fees. The largest source of district revenue is intergovernmental revenues of 45 million or 54%. Intergovernmental revenues are state and federal grant funds, most of which is pass-through funding for projects to improve air quality and public health in communities throughout the region. The largest intergovernmental revenue source is for the Community Air Protection Program, or AB 617, at 18 million, which is provided by the California Air Resources Board. This program addresses air quality impacts in designated environmental justice communities. 15 million will be dedicated to support clean air projects in disadvantaged communities. 3 million supports program implementation, including staffing, community engagement, air quality monitoring to measure air pollutants within the identified communities. Another primary source of revenue is license permits and franchises at 8 million or 10%. This revenue is derived from permit application fees, permit renewal fees, and other fees paid by customers for district services. The district's total expenditures for next fiscal year are also estimated to be 84 million, reflecting a balanced budget. The district's main expenditures are funds to support clean air projects, salary and benefits, and services and supplies. The largest expenditure for the district is other charges at 28 million or 31%. Other charges are pass-through grant funding to support clean air projects such as AB 617, Carl Moyer, Clean Cars for All, and other programs. As a reminder, these clean air programs are described in detail in the budget that is posted on the district's website. The second largest expenditure is salaries and benefits, enabling staff to provide air pollution control services. The following section goes over district costs related to the implementation of AB 423, which separated APCD from the county's governance structure. This table identifies district's anticipated costs for AB 423 implementation. Specifically, district costs for continuing to receive specified county services per the services agreement include County Human Resources, County Council, Civil Service Commission, and County Technology Office. County services no longer provided include Land Use Environmental Group Executive Support, Clerk of the Board duties, Office of Ethics and Compliance, Office of Strategy and Intergovernmental Affairs, and County Communications Office. Audit services were previously coordinated by the County Auditor and Controller, and they are now contracted independently. The district was required to purchase property and liability insurance independently as a result of the county being self-insured. These two services will result in additional ongoing costs of $486,000 and are funded within the proposed budget. The budget retains the 5 additional staff that were included in the current year's budget to perform the services no longer provided by the county as a result of AB 423. Additionally, the budget sets aside $2 million from fund balance as a one-time reserve for purchasing an accounting and budget financial system if the agreement with the county to continue using their system is not extended past July 1st of 2022. However, district staff will continue to explore options with the county and will be returning to the board with recommended options to purchase the district's own new system or continue using the county system as appropriate. Next is the budget summary, which shows the recommended budget for next fiscal year, along with the fiscal year 1920 actual results and the adopted budget and projections for the current fiscal year. This budget summary, which is listed on page 8 within the budget document posted on the website, page 9 and page 10 details the changes from the previous adopted budget to this recommended budget. As previously mentioned, the budget is balanced at 84.3 million. The district is projecting an estimated 2.5 million in savings by the end of the current fiscal year. These savings are resulting from salary savings due to vacancies and unspent transition costs that will roll over to the following year for completion of ongoing projects. The savings will roll over to the operations fund balance and can be used in future periods. I will be detailing more about the fund balance in the next few slides. The next section is the staffing summary for the district. There are no additional staff positions requested within this recommended budget. Currently, there are 164 existing positions, including air pollution control engineers, scientists, supervisors, and support staff. When the district returns to the board later this fall with proposed mid-year budget adjustments, it may be necessary to request additional staff positions to close any gaps in our existing programs and to ensure alignment with the needs of the community and the new board's priorities. In this section, we will look at the fund balance summary for the district's general and incentive funds. This table shows the projected fund balance for this fiscal year and the recommended fund balance for next fiscal year. The use of incentive fund balances are restricted and designated based on the specific grant requirements. 2 new committed fund accounts are requested to be established by the board and are incorporated in the recommended budget within the operations fund balance. This next section details these requested accounts. The operating reserve committed account within the general fund includes approximately 2 months of operating expenditure reserves that could be used if necessary to maintain core programs and services in cases of unforeseen economic revenue shortfalls, as determined by district management with governing board approval. The facilities and fleet committed account within the general fund can be used for facilities and fleet improvements and replacements as necessary, as determined by district management with governing board approval. As illustrated in the previous slides, the proposed budget is balanced and represents a baseline expenditure plan that the board can adopt on June 18th and subsequently amend as conditions warrant. That said, there are some fiscal challenges and uncertainties that the district currently has or may face in the future. As previously presented, the permit program is currently not achieving full cost recovery, and the board recently adopted a plan to address this. There are some mandated programs that do not have full funding and are subject to ever-increasing federal and state requirements. As an example, the Air Quality Monitoring Network grants have not increased in over a decade, while the costs have consistently increased. The district also has certain program grants where the costs to administer them are not fully covered by these grants. Grant amounts are estimated and the actual amounts are dependent on the state and federal budget processes. The district's usage of the county's financial system is set to expire on July 1st of 2022. And as a result, there will be high costs to acquire, implement, and maintain the district's own financial system. Also, there will be additional cost impacts associated with any service level enhancements or program expansions. In this section, I will highlight the significant accomplishments for the current fiscal year, the ongoing fleet replacement program, and the district's initial goals for next fiscal year. Here are some of the significant district accomplishments for this fiscal year. The district staff completed necessary milestones in order to formally separate from the county governance structure. Phase 1 measures of the Draft Community Emissions Reduction Plan, or SERP, were adopted. The district established an Office of Environmental Justice and dedicated 2 full-time positions to expand EJ work and outreach. Completed the cost recovery study and analysis and received policy direction from the board for adjusting fees for permit and other district services. Expended $13 million in grants for clean air projects, resulting in nearly 3,000 tons of emission reductions over the life of the projects. Adopted 8 rules to control and reduce air pollution control from boilers, turbines, and other stationary industrial sources. For the past 10 years, APCD has been pursuing opportunities to upgrade its fleet to reduce emissions by utilizing the most efficient vehicles, such as hybrid or electric options. This continuing strategy aligns with Chair Vargas's recent request to continue to electrify the fleet to the maximum extent feasible. The district has a total of 54 vehicles that are used by staff to carry out their monitoring, inspections, and emissions testing duties, and includes vans, trucks, SUVs, and sedans. 25 of these 54 are either hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or fully electric. The remaining 29 are gasoline, which includes 24 vehicles that will be replaced with hybrid or electric once their useful life has been reached. 5 specialized vehicles, such as customized vans or trucks, currently do not have replacement options available in the market at this time. That said, staff will continue to evaluate and review all vehicle replacements to minimize or eliminate gasoline vehicles to the maximum extent feasible, while still meeting the district's business needs. The recommended budget includes funding for the following district initial goals: complete Assembly Bill 423 projects, for example, the new website, evaluating and updating the public complaint process, and online documents and data sets. The district will continue to pursue additional grant funding for clean air projects and programs, complete and begin implementation of Phase 2 of the Portside Community Emissions Reduction Plan, collaborate with the county's Office of Environmental and Climate Justice and other jurisdictions to expand district's environmental justice work throughout the county, prepare a public participation plan to enhance the effectiveness of the district's public outreach and engagement activities, evaluate the feasibility of enforcing additional mobile source regulations, which generate the majority of air pollution in the region, and quantify emissions and health risk from welding operations and identify facilities that might be subject to permitting requirements. The requested action for today is simply to receive and consider the interim air pollution control officer's recommended budget for fiscal year 2021-2022. As a reminder, we will be returning on June 18th for the board's consideration for budget adoption. That concludes our budget presentation, and we are available for any questions the board may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Madam Clerk, are there any members of the public that wish to provide public testimony on this item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have received no formal requests to speak on this item. However, I do have one unidentified caller on the queue. And if that member of the public or that individual would like to speak, I'd ask that they press *9 at this time, and we can allow them to speak before your board. Okay. There's no hands raised, so we have received no requests to speak for this item.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Let's open the floor for board member comments. Do we have any questions or comments from board members? Member Gomez.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation and for the document that was sent to us. I do have just a couple of questions, and I really do appreciate the work that has been done in this transition, not only making sure that operational-wise that we're ready to go and ensure that we're doing the work that we're supposed to do, but I know that there's a lot of administrative changes as well, and this is a reflection of what we're talking about. So I really want to acknowledge that work. So thank you for that. I had a question in relation to our reserves. I know that other agencies tend to have a policy on how much we should have. Do we have that for this agency?
Thank you, Board Member Gomez. No, and we need to establish one.
Okay.
We're proposing 2 months of reserve. The board may decide it wants a larger or smaller reserve,
Mhm.
depending on your priorities.
Okay,
Because we're no longer supported by the county, of course, is a multi-billion-dollar agency. And so we felt at the time 2 months reserve would be sufficient because we always had the county, if necessary, perhaps to back us up. Now that we're independent, 2 months may be a little lean or not, but it's a great question and we should establish a policy on it.
okay, just wanted to make sure we could clarify that. So definitely something that we should do down the line. And in relation to the positions that we have, the 160, was it 164?
Yes.
Are all of those filled right now?
No,
Are there any vacancies?
we have a 7% vacancy rate through the current fiscal year.
Okay.
We're working feverishly to fill those. We're projecting a 4% vacancy rate in the new year. So we're trying to speed up our hiring processes. So currently at 7% vacancy rate, proposing a 4% just because of the natural turnover in positions. And that's resulting in the salary savings. We'd rather fill those positions and not have that salary savings. So we're working as
Yeah.
fast as we can, but it assumes 4%.
Okay. And can you, maybe not right now, but maybe as a follow-up, just let us know which positions those are?
Will do. Thank
I
you.
would appreciate that. Thank you. And then lastly, in relation to the, I forget what we call it, but the finance software that is
Yeah.
expiring, had we had a discussion with the county at all to be maybe a subcontractor and to eventually maybe next year consider doing our own acquisition of that software?
We have.
Okay.
So through the agreement with the county, we're set to expire, I think, the middle of next year using their accounting system.
Okay.
And they wanted to separate us, right? And so we agreed to that without knowing, frankly, though, how much it would cost to acquire a new system for ourselves.
Mhm.
Initial estimates are very high.
Yeah.
We upwards of $10 million for accounting and budget
Okay.
system. We think that's crazy, of course. We don't want the public to have to spend that much. And so we're anticipating asking the board if we may negotiate with the county to see if they're willing to extend the continued use of their accounting system, which is much more cost efficient, but it does represent some challenges for them and for us. And so we have not, we've touched that idea with the county, but we wanted to brief the board first and make sure the board wanted us to do that. So more to come on that, but I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, no, you did, and I appreciate that. And that would be something that I would definitely would want us to explore more, the possibilities. As long as we can avoid the big purchase, I think it would be good for us. If we can prolong it, that would be great. And then just lastly, in relation to the EJ positions that we're at, I don't know if there's a budget that comes with that amendment, and if so, can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. It's currently, there are currently 2 staff positions dedicated to ensuring environmental justice and equity in our programs. Those 2 staff positions are already budgeted and filled, and so are continued in the current budget. We're not proposing to increase staffing at this time. However, the board, through the governance committee and establishing the priorities, may decide to do that, in which case we will return for the mid-year adjustment to add staff wherever it's needed.
Okay, maybe let me clarify my question. So in relation to the work that they're set to do, I know that a lot of it is trying to improve our engagement. That's going to cost. So is there a line item that has resources attached to those efforts? Not knowing what that's going to look like, but it will, I mean, it's going to come back to us.
Thank you, board member. No, and I'll ask Deputy Director Domingo Vigil if he's online, maybe to be elevated and he can jump in because he's overseeing that office. But he's in the process of developing a work plan for the office, how to expand it. And that kind of information will be presented to the governance committee. And from that, we can decide what budget adjustments the board would like to make in that regard.
Okay.
There's Domingo. Domingo.
Good afternoon, Member Gomez. Yes, as Rob mentioned, we are currently developing a framework for the Office of EJ, which will determine the different types of activities that as an agency will be engaging on and the support that will be needed for those activities and for this office to carry out that work. And as Rob mentioned, through the mid-year adjustment this fall, we are hoping to have more information as to what kind of funding will be needed to support those activities.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. Let me go for that. And that
Thank you.
concludes my questions. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Member Shu?
Thank you. Mr. Ryder, a while back, we talked about potentially having a public information office for APCD and staffing that. And we didn't come up with any conclusions in our discussion. I'm wondering where we are with that, whether that's being considered, and how our budget may be adjusted with additional staffing for that, and how to go forward. And we talked about different kinds of information, everything from education to just a general traditional PO, public information officer. This kind of goes along with what we just discussed with the EJ positions, because it involves working with communities and different methodologies in doing that.
Yeah, thank you, Board Member Shu. Yeah, indeed, we have discussed it. And I know I mentioned to the board that we have an existing vacant position that I was considering basically my administrative assistant to the interim air pollution control officer. That position is vacant. I was considering reclassifying that position to the public information officer position. However, with my pending retirement, internally, we're considering not taking the administrative support position away from the new future director, and instead asking the board in our mid-year adjustments to add a position for public information. So that's the current strategy. So the current budget doesn't include a separate position for public outreach. But if the board desires, we do have an existing position that I can reclassify. But again, I didn't want to necessarily do that to the new director because he or she may need an assistant as well. So I'm sort of on the bubble, but we definitely need to have such a position. I agree with you. And so at the latest, we would address it in the mid-year adjustments, if that's acceptable.
I think I'm going to take a look again at the current budget now and see what we have, and also do the math that Georgette just suggested with regards to reserve fund and see where we are with that. And with that, maybe a follow-up question on that is, when we deal with a 2-month reserve, is that of the part of the budget of like staffing and operations?
Correct.
Not the pass-through money.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
the pass-through grant money shouldn't have to be part of that 2%. So it's not the 2 months of the 80 some millions. It's 2 months of the operating budget.
Yes, and
with
salaries and benefits largely.
Right.
Yes, sir. And your comments reminded me that we do have some existing vacant positions. So if the board desires, we could convert one of those to public information officer. And then in the budget, if we do need that existing position that we reclassified, we could add that to the new budget. So I could flip now. So I may be confusing you all, excuse me, but we have some options. We do have some options. So happy to work with you on that, Member Shu.
Okay, thank you.
Are you finished, Member Shu?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Member Bush.
Again, thank you to staff, all their hard work on this. I know how difficult it is, and how time consuming put all the budgets together. So really appreciate you all doing that. My question is on mobile sources, and it's just something I continue to want to focus on, given it's sort of a large source of emissions. And so I wondered if staff could provide some more detail about the mobile incentives program. I'm a little bit concerned. I see that there's a position that's being transferred from mobile services. So there were a total of 11, and now it's down to 10. And it's going over to the on page, it looks like 11. I see that it's an air quality specialist. It's transferring to the hotspots, and I don't have an issue with that, but I just wanted to, in general, ask staff what specifically are we doing to really address mobile sources, and could you give examples of what this mobile incentive program looks like?
Am I unmuted?
Sir, right.
Okay, sure thing, Member Bush. Yeah, so the mobile source incentive program, is complementary of our regulatory efforts. And as you noted, mobile sources create the most air pollution in the region. And so that's pass-through dollars to accelerate the cleanup of the motor vehicle fleet faster than would otherwise occur. So if, for example, A or B has a regulation, hypothetically, let's say, that requires zero emission trucks by 2035 or 2045, we could help fund the purchase of that equipment if the operator chooses to do that several years before the regulatory deadline. And so we're approaching it both with regulations and regulatory deadlines, but then if you want to move faster, we have incentive dollars to move forward. For our, one of them is called the Carl Moyer program. That was just the name of a gentleman that previously was a strong advocate for, he's passed, but a strong advocate for reducing heavy duty truck emissions. We receive $4 to $5 million a year. Half of that funding has to benefit disadvantaged communities. So it was one of the first legacy programs to recognize the importance of environmental justice. And so that's the Carl Moyer program. But we have several additional programs with different names and different funding sources, all from the state. So in addition to Carl Moyer, we have the Community Air Protection Program. That is a separate pot of incentive dollars given to the district specifically for disadvantage. So when I noted that half of the Carl Moyer funds, roughly 5 million, let's say, have to benefit disadvantage, I think the large majority, 80% of the AB 617 incentive funds have to benefit disadvantaged communities. We want 100% of that to benefit disadvantaged communities to the extent we can. But if for some reason there's not a viable project or something, the law allows us to spend a small portion in other areas. I'm not sure I've answered your questions.
Yes.
Oh, okay. There's several programs. Now, regarding the transfer of the one employee, if memory serves, this position was added specifically for a program that was advocated by Member Fletcher, the Clean Cars for All program, where we have applied to the state to establish a new program to help residents in disadvantaged communities to upgrade their transportation to new clean electric vehicles, or could even be used electric vehicles or transit right. The point is that's a $4 to $5 million program that was not funded last year by the state. The recession hit and the state funding temporarily bottomed out. So we have it in the budget with a position, but the funding never came through. The funding will come through this year, we believe. But in the interim, since that position wasn't needed, we transferred that position to a place where it was needed, which is our air toxics hotspots program. As you know, we've really ramped up our resources in that program. The workload was large. And so we temporarily moved a position. What we can do in the new budget, if warranted, is add a position back. The Clean Cars for All funding will come later this year. The new proposed budget by the state establishes tens of millions of dollars statewide for Clean Cars for All. So when we do get that funding, we'll be able to move forward and then add a position if we need to administer that program at that time. So it was a swap based on current workloads and funding sources.
Great. Okay. No, I think that answers my questions. So I really appreciate that. What I think is missing there, and this isn't, I don't take this as a criticism, because I just think we're all going through a lot of changes, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. So I don't think all of this can happen right away. But it's the elephant in the room is still the VMT, and that's what I still think is missing. Because at the end of the day, yes, we can electrify. Sorry, coffee hasn't quite kicked in yet. We could, address our fleet, but at the end of the day, with the new purchase of cars, there's still tons of other cars and trucks out there that will take some time to be phased out. And so the real issue that I want to appeal to, directly to all my colleagues, that we have to address is the VMT. And I think we're, as a body, we're in a position to do that. And it's going to take time and resources. And I think the biggest agency right now that is directly addressing that is SANDAG in the regional plan. And so I think for me, my comfort level, I really think that these are great steps. This is significant progress on this budget, addressing the mobile sources, and I appreciate you, Mr. Reeder, going into all that. But I still think that the VMT part is something that longer term that we need to do better be more proactive in addressing. Not quite sure how to do that, whether, you know, and I think we come up with ideas. So whether that's, you know, partnerships or making, you know, recommendations to different bodies, but that piece is what I'd like to see us in the long term address more. So yeah, not sure if by this next budget, if there's anything we can do, whether it's you know, more staff time, maybe it's a staffer part-time or full-time directly working with Sandat on what specific that VMT threshold that we need to reduce to get to that level. And I don't know if it's certain infrastructure projects, but that part is in the long term what I'd like to see missing, or like to see that otherwise, yeah, I really appreciate that this new effort on addressing the mobile sources. So I'm really pleased with that.
Thank you. And if I may add, just as a reminder, 423 does require the district to present a proposed rule to the board. It's called an indirect source rule aimed at medium and heavy duty truck traffic. And so the warehouses and the ports and the large land uses that attract a lot of truck trips, for example, the law requires the new board to consider adopting a rule to reduce emissions from those trucks. So it's not necessarily VMT reduction, but it has the same net result of further reducing emissions from the mobile source fleet, particularly from those that are caused the most, which is heavy duty trucks. So that is something that we'll be presenting to the board in conceptual form. We're proposing in December of this year to bring regulatory concepts to the board because some districts have already adopted rules addressing truck traffic from warehouses, et cetera, but they do it in different ways. And so we're looking at those scenarios now. And much like we presented to the board scenarios for fee increases, we'd like to present scenarios for a regulation on controlling indirect sources. And then once we get the board's buy-in on the concepts, whether it should be a single regulation affecting all land uses, or should we do one rule for warehouses, one rule for ports? You know, one district, San Joaquin, does one rule that any new development has to mitigate indirect source emissions. But like I said, other districts target specific industries in
like that one.
Right. And so these are the concepts that we would like to present to the board to get your input and stakeholders' input before we launch down rule development. So two-phase process coming to the board this December. And with a schedule and recommended scenarios for you to provide policy direction on, then we return with the rule. So it's an indirect source rule that'll help with emissions from mobile sources.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Fletcher.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just more of a comment on Clean Cars for All and this effort. I think this is a instructive moment for us as a board. The prior board, not the staff, the prior board of APCD was not interested in participating in this program, and it is significant state funding. It requires a little air district administrative support and help. But over the last few years, we have missed out on millions of dollars of Clean Cars for All funding programs because the board was not willing to make that commitment. Now, that has put us in a position that there is a lot of money for Clean Cars for All. However, existing established programs will get funded first. And there are a whole lot of air districts around California that prior to right now set up their programs. And so they will get funded first because they have established ongoing Clean Cars for All program. We do not, because for many years, the prior board would not authorize the going to draw down literally millions of dollars for zero emission vehicles in low income communities. So that puts us to the back of the line. Now, we will work, but what we're going to need to do is mobilize our entire community to weigh in for those decisions when those decisions get made, and we will share with everyone when that is, to strongly advocate that San Diego needs to be included in the Clean Cars for All funding program. Because this goes to a broader issue I have that I think it's great that we're going to electric vehicles and everyone's going to buy electric vehicles, but that's only for new car purchases. And we all know that in most of our EJ communities, that will have very little impact just because of the economics of electric cars. And so I think it's vital that we have the capacity on standby. And I just want Rob to confirm that with the proposed budget, if we are selected for Clean Cars for All, Rob, I want to make sure that with what we have, are we able to support it, or do we need to make a change to this budget to ensure we're able to support it? That's my first question.
We're able to support it, Supervisor. We may find that it's beneficial depending on how popular the program is to add a position to administer it. But we will be contracting out with some help to implement the program, which will help us administer it under existing staffing. If we do get the funding before we have an opportunity to consider another staff person, we can certainly implement the program straight away.
Okay, thank you, Rob, for that. I appreciate that. And then just for all my fellow board members to know, there's going to come a moment where we as a region are going to have to advocate to get included in this program. But we should not at all assume that just because there's tens of millions of dollars for this program, it means we're going to get a dime. Because again, other areas and jurisdictions started this many years ago. Other APCDs started this many years ago, and their established programs will get funded first before they consider an expansion to a new jurisdiction. So we will have to organize our region to make sure we have a strong voice to get us in that program. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Medina.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I want to thank the district and Rob and the staff for presenting a really detailed budget that allowed me to drill down on some of the questions, which is what I'm going to focus on right now. I'll have a couple of questions and then a larger overall question. But just in finding out about the government programs that we're on, we benefit from. Many of them are state programs, some of them are federal. Could you just, and thank you for Supervisor Fletcher for explaining what Clean Cars for All was, because that was one on my list. But can you just give us a rundown on what these programs can provide on a long term? What I'm interested in, how much into the future can we assume that this level of funding will continue, or is this a lot of one-time sources and we have to constantly keep looking for new programs? You're mute.
Oh, excuse me. I just need to. Thank you, board member. I fear it's the latter. That it's a year-to-year process. Admittedly, year to year, the funding has been provided by EPA and ARB, but it's subject to the federal and state budgeting processes, which are, political processes. So there's no guarantee from year to year. With that said, funding has remained fairly steady, except for the dropout last year because of COVID. ARB experienced a short-term substantial drop in revenue sources that affected our programs, but historically they've stayed generally steady, but we never take any year for granted. We know that going in each year, it's a new federal or state budget subject to the administration that's in place at that time. And so that's a concern, and that's another reason we need fund balance, frankly. Yeah.
Okay, well, and the reason I asked is because if you look at the 3 years you provided, 2019 operating expenses or operating revenue and operating expenses pretty much match. It was a little bit of a surplus, but last year and then the year that you're proposing for next year, we see an increase in intergovernmental funding of almost twice what was in 2019. And yet our operating budget starts running into a deficit. Last year was 7% deficit. And this year it's almost 14% deficit. So it seems like the more work we do, the more money we lose. So, so I'm curious, what does that tell us about the long-term financial health of the district, and whether we really, the effort is to always continue to look for new sources of funding? Because operating, salaries and all the fixed costs have not really changed that much. It's been these one-time funding sources that have really increased the overall revenue, and yet operating funds we're losing. And so we're using that reserve, and as you can see, it's been whittling down. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, first off, for context, the large swings in intergovernmental revenues are, to a large extent, due because the projects haven't been completed yet. So we'll get funding in 1 year. Say we'll get $10 million to fund a project to clean up the trains in North County Transit District. And so we budget $10 million, but it may take a few years to develop those new cleaner trains. And so we actually won't will carry over the funds and expend them in a future year. And so large swings from year to year to some extent is just due to the legacy funding that's finally being expended once the project is delivered. And so I think to some extent that's a little bit misleading about the wide swings based on that situation that happens it's an ongoing thing with all districts. So they give you the money in 1 year, but you have 3 years to spend it. And so we budget it as if we're going to spend it, but it often carries over. And so there's swings. There are swings in general, but the larger swings are frankly due to the differences in how many projects are completed in that fiscal year. So that I think is the swings are more modest than you might otherwise think then. But the funding, the grants have not increased.
Right.
Certainly they've dropped or swung a little bit, but they've not increased year over year. And yet the state and federal requirements do increase year over year. So that's a real concern of all the air districts, particularly for AB 617, for example, fighting for funds every year as we add more and more communities. So far, the budget is not, the state budget for that is not increasing in alignment. And so I'm basically agreeing with you. I wish I had a better answer. It is a year-to-year process subject to political processes, and that's unnerving and hard to, develop, a high confidence in a sustained program when we have to constantly balance, funding levels. So I'm just acknowledging the fact so far we've managed, but, in some ways we've had to use DMV dollars, as you well know now,
Right.
to cover all kinds of different gaps at times. That was a policy direction in the past that's now changing. And so now there is a greater need to find additional funding. So I will say that we're hearing from all the board members and from the public, it's time to really go after additional dollars at APCD. And so with the budget, with the state, the state went from a budget deficit last year to a budget surplus this year. And so there's a lot of additional dollars being proposed for things like environmental justice projects, but they don't have an APCD name label on them. We'd have to compete for them, and we will do that under your guidance. And so we got to expand our number of funding sources because they're a little bit limited right now, and they're too subject to variability. Bay Area gets property tax revenue, for example. So I guess that's a more solid source of funding that's not subject to political processes. And so there are other districts that have different issues than we do, but we have a relatively few funding sources: EPA, ARB, permit fees, and then Department of Motor Vehicle. And a lot of those are flat. Of course, we're going to raise permit fees now, but the EPA and ARB funding, understandably, they have a lot of needs. So I'm not suggesting that it's an easy just to give us more money, but nevertheless, we've got to fight for it every year.
Yeah. Well, and one of my points, and I'll close with this, was there's an administrative overhead that comes with these grants and these incentive programs. And I'm just wondering, are you comfortable that we are actually charging what it costs us to manage those programs? Or is there a need for additional sources or reconfiguring those equations or those formulas? If it's possible to do that, they may be set by the funding agency.
Yeah, great question. So you're right. We spend more to administer these programs, and sometimes the grants allow us to recover. Sometimes it's 5% of the grant, let's say, can be used for staff time, 4 or 5%. We often find it takes more than that. Because these are incentive programs for mobile sources largely, we felt justified in, if there's a gap, use the Department of DMV vehicle registration revenue, because that is designed for work to directly impact mobile source emissions, and that's what these programs do. So we've been able to stay whole in our incentive programs using DMV dollars, and the board may wish to continue doing that. We have advocated to the state is aware that the grant, the administrative portion of the grant amounts is usually not enough to cover. But I think the districts have been able to find other sources, in our case, using DMV dollars. Not a lot, more of it was used, frankly, for permit related program that the board has addressed. But a smaller portion of DMV is used for our incentive staff to cover any costs not covered by those grants. I don't have figures at the top of my head. We can try to get those to you, but we use DMV dollars when we're not whole.
Yeah.
And I will say, however, on AB 617, we received like 1 year, $18 million in grant funds. 5% of that was going to be way more than we needed. And so we just took what we needed and made sure the rest could go to projects.
Yeah.
So in some cases, it's more than we need, depending on how many millions of dollars are included in the grant. So we have to pay attention to these things and track these things. And so that's what we're doing. But it's a little bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah, no, and I understand, and that's probably why we should continue to keep applying for the border as a, as a CERP program area. I don't know if it will be
Absolutely.
another 18 million, but it couldn't hurt.
Couldn't hurt.
And each of us will probably bring priorities and needs. I would, as I mentioned to you earlier this week, I would like us to really consider contingency planning for air pollution emergencies as part of our capabilities. And we need to see where all these things are going to come from. But thank you. That's all my questions, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Member Elo Rivera.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thanks, Rob, for all the work that you and the team are doing. And my colleagues here asked a lot of really good questions. One thing that I'm curious about, and I have the same curiosity with respect to the city budget as well. You mentioned that you anticipate a lot of potential state funding. And I think that we're in a little bit of a different situation where there's this massive influx of state cash and we don't know what it'll all amount to. And where I'm going with this is, in the case that some of the funding that is available is there to fund programming or work that we're already anticipating doing and is already budgeted for? One, do you anticipate we would still compete for those funds? And two, is there a plan in place for what we would do with the revenue, with the funding that is then freed up as a result of drawing down state grant money instead of what we've already budgeted?
Thank you, Board Member Elo Rivera. As we go for those new state dollars, they will come with requirements of specifically what you have to use those dollars for. I would anticipate much of that would be used, for example, for additional money to clean up the truck fleet in environmental justice communities, which is something we're already trying to do with our incentive program. So we have staff in place that are budgeted and available to administer those programs. So if we apply to the state for additional money, it would just be on top of the pass-through grant funding that we're already receiving. If it required an additional staff person because of the volume of work, we can propose that to the board. But we're proposing to expand the programs as opposed to replace or we couldn't use that funding for something other than what it was designed for by the state. So we couldn't take that funding and then use it for another reason, move around dollars and free up dollars for other purposes. We'd have to just expand our existing program that addresses that same source of emissions like trucks, just add more dollars, more projects to it. We, instead of 100 trucks, we try to do 200 trucks or that kind of thing. So I think it's going to be more incentive dollars in my mind that I was thinking, pass through incentive dollars. If there's grant opportunities for our own Office of Environmental Justice, for example, staffing of it, we'll absolutely go for those as well. And I don't know that we would, well, we could, if the board wanted to, I suppose we could consider perhaps supplanting, what's currently being used to fund our Environmental Justice Office, for example, which is DMV funds, maybe with state funds, and use those DMV funds for projects, that kind of a thing. But I'm thinking most of them are going to be pass-through grant dollars. But if there are new programs that would require us to staff up or build up, we will, we're prepared to do that with your approval. But we just can't budget them now because they're competitive dollars and we don't have any. Frankly, it's early yet. We're not seeing any kind of guidelines for how they're going to allocate those or anything. So that's where the mid-year adjustment may help if there are already some of those on the street. But we're charged with going after grant dollars under AB 423, and so we do need to actively go for all these new dollars to the extent the board wants us to, and it makes sense for the program.
Got it. And then as a follow-up to that, given the unique year this is in terms of potential grant funding, is APCD appropriately staffed and resourced in order to be truly competitive in pursuit of that funding. It would seem like a worthwhile investment if it is necessary to build some additional capacity for this unique year.
You raise a great point. I think I think perhaps not, depending on the program, how big the new program would be. We would have to staff up to take on some additional grants, possibly. In other words, say we have 10 people now, I think, in our incentives program, 10 staff, and they're full-time busy, frankly. And so if we were to go after a new program to administer, I don't know, medium duty electric trucks on behalf of the state or something, we would need to staff up for that. Whereas South Coast Air District is large, and they do go after those statewide programs because they have more staffing. Bay Area does. So you're right. We would need to build the capacity. It's a chicken and egg thing, kind of. So it's a great question. I wish I had a better answer for you, but I think you're on it. That is an issue. Our ability to go after new dollars, to some extent, is constrained by our current resources and staffing. So it's a chicken and egg thing, a little bit.
For sure. Well, I certainly would be interested in, I think, Rob, you don't strike me as someone who would be, would gamble wildly in terms of, trying to bring a bunch of new folks on unnecessarily. But I would certainly be interested in hearing from you and the rest of staff if we do think that this would be a time to push some more chips in terms of investment to pursue that funding. San Diego has a reputation, not at APCD necessarily, but kind of as a region, of often missing out on funding opportunities at the state and federal levels, and certainly don't want to miss the boat this year, given the windfall the state is experiencing.
Thank you. You know what we can do, board member, is if it's acceptable to the board, apply for these programs, and then if successful, propose budget adjustments for the staffing that will need it. There's usually some lead times associated. They have to come out with guidelines, then open up a solicitation, then we would apply. If we were and we would write the proposal in a manner that if we were successful, we would add staffing to administer as necessary, because dollars do come with it for admin, depending on the program. So we could go ahead and apply now, and then if we're successful, add staff in the mid-year budget adjustment as necessary to run those programs. I think there will be time to do that. These things take time sort of to play out a bit. So we're happy to go for everything, and then whatever we win, staff up with your approval to implement it, so that we no longer say we're not going to. We used to, frankly, not apply sometimes because we were concerned about staffing, and when it's part of the county, we competed with other departments about who could add staff. It's a large organization. They don't want to grow unconstrained every year. And so there was always an issue with staffing and competing with other departments. Who has the priority, who needs it more this year? We're not. So we used to sort of say no to some grants when we thought, that's going to take 5 staff and there's no way we're going to get 5 staff. So that's changed now under the new board. And so we'd be happy to apply for those. And then if we're successful, add staff.
Thanks, Rob. And then this is another chicken and egg question. So there's the capacity to kind of implement the grant opportunities. There's also the capacity necessary to pursue those grant opportunities and apply. And where do you feel like we are on that front?
Oh, such a great point. It's so true, because often we're working overtime, frankly, on our grant proposals because we don't have enough, during the regular work. So we are a bit stretched. Our supervisor over that program, she is our main grant writer and does a fantastic job at it, but she's often pushed for time because she's overseeing all the other grant programs. I would like to, I'll just say it now, I would like to, in the mid-year budget adjustment, come back to potentially add some more staffing to that program, which I should have mentioned earlier. That program reports to me directly, so it goes straight from the supervisor of incentives to the air pollution control officer. Most of the programs in the district, though, have a chief that helps to oversee those programs and provide executive level support and can fight for funding and those kind of things. And then a deputy director, another level. Instead, in our incentives program, just by virtue of my experience at the district, they've continued to report just to me as I've moved up. That won't work under the next administration with a new director. And so I am anticipating that we'll propose or maybe even try to do some of that with my existing vacancies, creating more oversight structure incentives program, not to add administrative burden, but to help bring in more dollars, to help allocate the workload, those kinds of things that I'm trying to do now as director, and it's been challenging. So within, hopefully within a few months, we'll have more capacity in that program to write proposals, because we'll have, executive management over those programs that I currently do as best I can, but I'm awfully busy.
Okay, got it. And I'll just conclude by saying that, again, there's a lot to be said for investing in the people and to one, give them the capacity they need to do the work and then do the work sustainably. I won't speak for my colleagues here, but I don't believe in keeping, government and government agencies small just for the sake of doing it. There's no value to the people in that, right? So I think I want to make sure that you all are communicating to us what you need to fulfill the mission in the greatest way possible. I want this to be a big, powerful air pollution control district that gets the job done for the community, right? And if that means needing to grow in certain ways, and we can sustain that financially, there's no reason in my mind not to do that. So I just would love to hear more in the future along those lines.
Thank you for your leadership on that. Staff, I know staff are very excited to hear that, and that's what we're feeling from this board, that it's time for us to grow.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Member Gomez.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to comment a bit more, Vice Chair. And this is actually in the lines of the last comment of Councilmember Gil Rivera. I know right now the state is going through its budgeting process, and the governor is possibly allocating new resources that we could go after. So I do want to make sure that we're following those conversations and that we do apply just because other agencies are going to. For example, there's discussions of adding more resources to the heavy duty electrification program, and that we can access to, to ensure that we're bringing those resources here. And then the 617 fund as well is being discussed to significantly increase. So we want to be primed to be going after those resources and other discussions that he's putting forward. So I just want to make sure that we are tracking those conversations and hopefully engaging, because that if we support that as an agency, we should also be applying for it, being that it can help us address some of the air quality issues here at the local level, and those resources are set for that. So I know right now there's no mentioning of that in the budget, or at least projection. So hopefully in the revised, we can have a category that, not knowing if we're going to get it or not, but at least have a placeholder of what we're thinking we're applying for, so we're aware of it as well, because I do think it's critical.
Thank you for the clarity and the direction. We'll do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you. And Member Elo Rivera, is your hand up again? No? Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, that's all right.
My arm's tired. It's been up for so long. I'll put it down.
Okay. So I did have maybe a comment and then a question. And borrowing from, looking at budgets for the last 20 years at a city level, and understanding that this is a more program specific, the way the budget was presented was a bit different than, say, the city budget, in that for the vacancies, the city tends to carry those vacancies over, and it does appear that with known vacancies, and at this point I think you said 7%, with the goal of reducing it down to 4%, you are including that in the budget versus outside of funding those vacancies, you are actually putting them into the budget for use for other things, like what we would call one-time kind of projects, right? So I guess what the big challenge here is that we operate more on programming, and there is a time for those programs. As you said, sometimes it might be a 3-year, 5-year program. So as you move forward, are you going to be, when you grow the organization, are you going to be anticipating what the maximum number of employees could be? And are you also looking to contract for certain programming, or how do you intend to go, moving forward as we grow?
Yeah. Thank you, Vice Chair Sanchez. I fear my vision is kind of short term, to the extent that I've only thought we'll grow incrementally year over year, as opposed to having we want to be 200 employees by such a date. It was more, what is going to be as the board members have been suggesting here, there's lots of dollars to go after, lots of programs. So as we go after those, we would grow as warranted to implement those programs. So it was more of an incremental program by program, grant by grant basis, as opposed to a long-term. I think we'll be 210 people by the next 3 years. However, I do think we're currently at 164. It wouldn't take much to climb to 200, and we could probably keep them very busy in protecting air quality. And so I do envision we are going to grow, but how much so, it remains to be seen, frankly, at least in my view. I don't know if that helps.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you, members, for all the comments. I do need a motion to continue consideration of the budget to June 18th, 2021.
I can make the motion. I'll go ahead and make the motion.
Okay, thank you. A motion by Member Gomez, second by Member Medina. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Member Bush?
Yes.
Member Elo Rivera?
Yes.
Member Fletcher?
Fletcher, aye.
Member Gomez?
Yes.
Member Medina?
Yes.
Member Shu?
Aye.
Member Whitburn?
Yes.
Vice Chair Sanchez?
Sanchez, aye.
Thank you. That motion passes with all board members who are present voting aye.
Thank you. And before we go on to adjournment, are there any comments that any of the members would like to share in terms of information that are not, that would be items off the agenda? Any members wishing to say anything else? Doesn't look like it. Well, okay. Well, then thank you, staff and everyone. This concludes all of our business today. The next meeting of the APCD board will be on June 18th, 2021 at 1:30. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank
board
you.
members.
Thank you.